Hi, welcome again to Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Well, as you know, if you've been watching the programs for the last few weeks, we've been basing our latest group of people on the program on people that are in Who's Who, the publication that came out last year, and I'm telling you, it's making my life a lot easier because I didn't realize there were this many people that were in so many different diverse occupations and hobbies in the area, and I've met a lot of interesting people, and here's one that I hadn't met before, and welcome Gower Kennedy to the program.
Thank you, Bruce.
And I just found out that Gower, although I've heard of your connections with the college over the years, is also related to one of the earliest Mounties, medical Mounties. Yeah, in fact, I think I read somewhere where he was one of the first, but I'm not sure, medical doctor in Southern Alberta. And how does he tie in with you?
No, he's not related to me, Bruce, in any way. His son, who also was a doctor, brought me into the world, and as I grew up, we became very good friends. I became a very good friend of the doctor that brought me into the world.
So I have to keep looking for this connection, eh?
Yes.
Okay, I'll keep looking. I've been interested in the Kennedy connection, and before that there was Dr. Kitson, who was the early medical man that came to Southern Alberta with the Mounted Police, and later died of an overdose of morphine, I believe, in Minnesota. But that's another story. We're here to talk about you today, and Gower is an author, a rather different type of author than I guess I am or most people are in Southern Alberta. Your connection is the world of technology and the world of welding. How many books have you got out on welding?
Well, I would think with the large book here, Bruce, and the revised book with these, as well as another manual that complements them, I would say with the foreign sales, I think well over 100,000 books have been sold.
And are these throughout Canada or England or where?
I have to say that the majority of books sold today are sold in the United States. Some in Canada, but not as many as I would like to have had sold in Canada. But the United States have certainly, the publishers have done a wonderful job in the United States getting these books to different colleges and universities.
I see. So what, are you connected with the college now at all?
No, I retired here, Bruce, took an early retirement. I felt that being an author now, that it took up quite a bit of my time, and I was doing quite well on the royalties end of it, so I was able to promote more time to writing.
To the thing that you really loved, I guess.
Well, I enjoyed it anyway, that's right.
That's good. Okay, so your connections go back to Fort Macleod, and just looking through the who's who here, you have your own consulting firm now. What type of consulting would you do?
Well, the latest one that I did, Bruce, was for some lawyers that had a case in Concord, New Hampshire. That was at the Concord School in New Hampshire, where, as you recall, the teacher had gone up in one of the spaceships and lost her life. Well, one of the students there had been burned quite badly in a welding accident. And of course, the lawyers who were taking the case needed some consulting, and so they contacted me, and just recently we finalized that, and that was the latest that I have done. I've enjoyed that very much, working with these fellows from New Hampshire. Now,
going back a few years, we go back all the way to the Second World War, Canadian Navy. How about some of your experiences in the Canadian Navy?
Well, before joining the Navy, I was in munitions. I worked in munitions in Calgary, and at that time, if you were in the munitions and you were in say a department where they needed you, they froze you to the job, and it wasn't until 1943 that I decided that maybe they would release me and I could join the Navy, which I did. I spent time on the East Coast, and then I was, after VE Day, they sent me to the West Coast, and I was in charge of a portion of the ordnance shop in Naden, that's on the West Coast, just the time when all the prisoners of war were coming back from Japan. And the ones that were well enough, we used to bring them in and let them work on the machines and teach them how to use them. They were waiting for transportation home to Scotland or England or wherever it might be. And some pitiful cases arrived at that time, you know, but we only had the ones that were able to work in the ordnance shop and spend time there until they had transportation home, as I say, to Scotland, England, or wherever else they might want to go.
It's always interesting to see how the threads tie together throughout a person's life and how they get into certain occupations and interests and so on. Now, the fact that you got into welding in later years, did this tie in with your munitions activity way back?
I'd have to say that it did. I took the youth training program, you know, before I went into munitions, and you know, the munitions end of it. And then when I got into the Navy, knowing that I had worked in a munitions plant, I took the trades test, the British trades test, and that's where I got my machinist rating. And it was through the machinist rating that when I came back in 1946, I started a machine and welding shop in Fort Macleod.
I see. Now, when you were, before you got into the forces, which you must have been just a young fellow when you joined up, I guess, eh?
I like you to say that. I thought I was a young fella. I could still skate in that, but I guess in comparison to the officers that were in the Navy, I was a little older. Okay,
when you were, say, in high school and so on, what did you look ahead? What did you hope to do at that time?
Well, at that time, I first thought that I would like to go into to dentistry. That was what I intended to do, and it never happened. I had a matriculation, and when Bill C-49 came out in 1962, and they needed somebody with a matriculation and also trade training to teach at the Lethbridge, then junior college, I thought I'd try it and see what happened, and so I went to university for the first time in 1962, and from 1962 to 1972, I worked on a bachelor's and master's degree, and once I completed that, I went into administration at the college. You were at the, I see here, Director of Personnel from 65 to 72. Did we get that right? That's correct, Bruce, that's right. And then up to Executive Assistant to the President. That's right. Then I became the Executive Assistant to the President, but my main duties were still in personnel. I see. Which president would this have been? Dr. C.D. Stewart. Oh, yeah. And, of course, you knew Dr. Cousins from, he would have been at the university, I guess, by the time you were... Well, Dean Cousins, Jim Cousins, he was with the university, of course, when I was at the college. Yeah. And, of course, we used to go together. Jim and I used to go out together, and he'd battle for the people from different towns in the university. That's right. And I'd battle for them for the community college, and so we got to know each other quite well and traveled together to different towns, you know, trying to promote both the college and the university. I remember that. It used to be quite a road show, I guess. You'd go all over southern Alberta at one time. Yes, Jim and I made quite a number of trips together, you know, and I guess at the time he thought I was a pretty fast driver, and he used to say we have to get to a certain place at a certain time, and he always used to say, well, I think we can slow down a little bit now, we've got lots of time. Yeah. You say you had a welding shop in Fort Macleod. Now, would this be called a blacksmith shop? Is this the same type of thing we're talking about? Yes. I had a blacksmith shop. You know, it was in the same building. We had a blacksmith shop. I had never shoed horses in my life, but I did sharpen cultivator shovels and plowshares and things like that. And just to make things interesting, I had quite a beard, and with the ash coming up, I used to be quite white by the time I'd finished the day. Is that right? Well, a question that's always coming through my mind, what is the difference between a blacksmith shop and a welding shop? Well, in a blacksmith shop, you have a forge, and you heat your iron that you're going to weld by means of the fire, the forge fire, and then you do your welding by pounding it together and fusing it together by pressure. With welding, you just use an arc off what they call a stinger, and it's due to the electricity going through the rod that fuses the metal together. So if you have to be a real good blacksmith, and I wouldn't say that I happen to be a real good blacksmith, to do a good fusion job on iron in a forge. But we used the arc and gas welding machines.
Do some of these old-time welding shops that are still around, I think of Bell's and I think Hunt's is still around, do they still use the forge type of thing, or are they strictly?
Very few of them use, Bruce, use the forge. I went to a place called, it's called Fort Steele, and I was really impressed with a young fella there that was doing blacksmith work. In fact, he made a ring, and it was formed like a horseshoe, and he did it in a matter of minutes, and I'd say it wasn't any larger than about a dime in diameter. And I thought, boy, that fella is really a blacksmith, and we haven't got any more like that today.
Is that right? And he's just a young fellow, did you say?
He wasn't too old.
Now you were mentioning earlier that you were connected with the Fort Macleod Historical Association at the time that they built their fort, the fort as we know it today. Is that correct? That'd be in the early 50s, I think, was it?
That's right, Bruce. At the present time, I'm a life member of the Macleod Historical Association, and I happen to be president of the Chamber of Commerce when we turned the sod for the fort, and it didn't take very long before them to build the fort to what it is today. And I happen to be fortunate in still being the president of the Chamber of Commerce when we brought in, I think the commissioner was Nicholson of the Mounted Police from Ottawa to cut the ribbon and officially open the fort, yes. I've
been rather interested in that whole project simply because I do a lot of work in old newspapers. And when you read through the early 50s newspapers, you see some interesting sidelights to this. For example, they talk about how they're going to build a copy of the original fort in Fort Macleod. But of course that isn't what they got, was it? They put the turrets on, which the original fort didn't have the turrets. And I always like to say, because the Western movies at the time always had turrets, and tourists expect to see turrets. So that was kind of a thing I was interested in. You must have been through that controversy at the time, though.
Yes. You see, if you go to Macleod and stand on what is known as the Mackenzie Bridge and look eastward, you will see the island where the original fort happened to be. Due to flooding, they moved the fort up where the town is today and built the fort there. And I would say that they couldn't have found a more rocky place than where they built it, because most people today have to bring in soil. Some are lucky, but most of them bring in soil in order to cover the gravel that happens to be there. So I think as far as the island was concerned, the town site today has as many rocks as perhaps the island had.
How about the fact that they put the tourists on? Did you have a little problem with this at the time, or do you even remember that controversy?
No, I wasn't involved in any controversy in regard to the turrets. If you ask me now, I think they're impressive and are necessary, as you say, for a tourist attraction. You might be interested to know that some of us, and I guess that would be the people that they considered as life members today, some time back we in Alberta got a grant of $22 on 2 occasions from the oil companies. And some of us who had belonged to the association, we put our $22 into the fund fort, you know, and that kind of got things started as well.
Is that right? I was traveling on a project that I was involved in, I think it was '74, the Mounted Police project, and we were up at Slave Lake, I believe it was, and a fellow flagged us down and said that he was the fellow that designed those original what do you call, dioramas of the 2 forts in Fort Macleod. Now I have no idea what his name was. I don't know if you remember who the person was or not.
No, I can't remember, Bruce. You might be interested to know that a lot of people would think that the fort is built of logs, solely of logs, but my job at the time was to, the people that I had working for me used CPR rails in order to support that fort fence all around. So it's pretty well supported by steel.
Is that right?
A lot
I guess
of people
in Fort Macleod sometimes you think you need steel to support big fence.
Not with our wind, you wouldn't think, would you, Bruce?
I would think so. I think yours is worse than ours is, and ours is bad enough. Okay, so Fort Macleod in the early days, what was it like as compared with the big city of Lethbridge?
Well, I have just finished a rough draft of my life as a boy in Fort Macleod. The reason I wrote it was for perhaps my grandchildren to read, and when they get a little bigger. Two of them are old enough now to read it. And my daughter and my son think that it's quite interesting. Some of the things that are in there, they never saw, and their children will never see the same thing that we had at that time. Macleod was a small, friendly town where you could leave your doors open and nobody would steal anything that you had. Much different than today, Bruce. But as far as the town was concerned, quite an active town. And as I look back, well, I must have liked it, because when I got discharged from the Navy, I came back to Fort Macleod to start my business. What were some of your hobbies? Curling must have been, you were into curling? Yes, curling. I enjoyed curling very much, and still am interested in curling. And of course, hockey. I was very interested in hockey, baseball, and I guess I spent more time at sports than I did at academic stuff. How about midnight days? That's the name of your fair, isn't it? That's right. The midnight days, as I recall them, although I was never real active in the midnight day situation, but we had some very prominent people there. A theater manager, Mr. Dan Boyle, that you've probably heard about from way back, and the Swinnertons, Albert Swinnerton, Huey Craig, Kreitzer, and some of these fellas really put on a good show and used to bring in actors from Hollywood every time they put on a show, and they had wonderful parades at that time. And really went all out. Would you like to give us a year? A year? I have taken some 16-millimeter pictures of quite a number of the parades, and I would say that I could go back probably to when some of them were real good, maybe say 51, 52, in that area, I think. You say you've taken movie film. Yes. I hope you'll see that that's preserved over the years. I was talking to a fellow once who was, believe it or not, worked for the garbage pickup in Calgary. And he says that he's found actually case after case of people throwing out movie film from families. And some of this old movie film, I think, is very valuable for historical archives over the years. Because even if you're looking at a picture of a parade, how the buildings change behind the parade is rather interesting. So don't throw that movie film out. Well, when you mention them throwing their films away, I imagine you, in your business, wish that some of the photographs had been retained rather than destroyed, which would have been of a real asset to you in your business. Well, of course, this is always a problem, isn't it? That's right. Somebody passes on and they go in and empty out the house. It's of no value to the people coming in after, really. And this is what happens. I've got a bit of collection of audio archives, and some of those go back to the 50s. And there's some people, and I can't give you a name right now, but that remember the old post, the old fort on the island at Fort Macleod, and they actually describe it. Another one was one of the Ware, Nettie Ware, just died, I believe. And I think it was her who describes being on the train the night that Frank Slide fell down. So you can hear this person talking about what she remembers as a child with the Frank Slide disaster. And of course, there's a real feeling when you can hear somebody that actually was there talk about it. Yes, my father, of course, was on the railroad at the time when this happened, the Frank Slide, and of course, I've heard all the stories that I think are true because of being there at the time. When he was there, he knew everything that had gone on, and some of the stories have been expanded today to make them sound, a little better. But you mentioned about them throwing away different things. I had a newspaper published by my grandfather the whole year of 1899. The 1888 one was destroyed. I had given that to the fort, the Macleod Historical Association. Now it was getting into pretty bad shape, but I don't know where it is today. I haven't been able to locate it, and they haven't notified me of what they've done with it. I'm hoping that they haven't thrown that out.
Yeah, I should hope so. So you came to Lethbridge. What year was it you came to Lethbridge?
I commuted all the time from Fort Macleod until 1972. And in 1972, I made the move into Lethbridge.
But you were working here before that?
Oh, yes. I started here. I set up the welding shop for a very fine director, Mr. Twa, in 1962, or the first part of 63. And I was a welding instructor at the college to start with.
Could you tell me how the kids, and again we're in a new tangent here, how the kids in those days, in the early 60s, differ from the ones that are probably there today?
Well, I was very pleased to work with them. I even had some brought in from Bowdoin, the Bowdoin Institute. Hard to handle students, but I found that if you used a diplomatic approach, they were just great to work with, you know. And I found the students real good to work with. As far as students are concerned today, I think that each year the students are getting better educated. I think they're smarter. Sometimes I think that perhaps the discipline hasn't been quite like it should have been way back when. I think that regardless, they'll make out though.
Oh, I think so, yeah. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit, from Fort Macleod in the early days to being a best-selling author to the early days in the community college, and I guess you've been a part of all these eras. Is there anything that we've missed out that maybe you could tell us about? Anything more about the Kennedy connection and the publishing business? Well,
my grandfather, of course, came over with the Mounted Police. And an interesting thing about it, there's, I believe, first of all, it was the, the Northwest Mounted Police, and then you would know better than I, because I don't recall it, but I can't recall it. But then there was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Royal Northwest.
And then the other one, you know, there's three.
Yeah.
Well, I have the 3 application forms where he and his oldest son and his youngest son made application for to the police, and each one of them are from one of the different organizations of mounted policemen.
Oh, I see.
And I still have that, you know, copies of that, which is quite interesting, you know, because here they all are, all 3 of them, mounted policemen serving in Canada, in the Western Canada, and belonging to a different mounted police group as the years went on.
Well, I'd like to finish on one note, and that's the fact that you're writing down all these memoirs to give to your grandchildren, and I think this will maybe be the most important legacy you'll ever leave. My father wrote his autobiography at the time, and he's gone now, and it's a real treasure in our family, and I'm sure that your family will enjoy it, and I wish more people would give some thought to writing down. The world is changing so quickly that future generations are going to want to know what Grandpa did and so on. So I want to commend you on that especially, and thanks very much for being our guest, and next week we'll see you again. Who's Who in Southern Alberta.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Enjoyed it.
Good. Welcome again to Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Well, those people that have been watching the program over the last few weeks have probably recognized some faces that they've seen and heard, if you can hear faces, over the last many, many years. And we've got an institution today. Welcome, George Brown.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce.
George, I can remember hearing my father talk about you. I think it was when you were in the armed services during the Second World War, and you were still doing a little bit of singing, I believe. And I know that everybody loved you then, and I don't think anything's changed.
Well, I hope not.
One of the things that about this program is a lot of the people that watch it are old-time Southern Albertans, and I'm sure practically every one of them knows you. But I wondered if you could start off, before we forget today, to tell us a little bit about the family roots in Southern Alberta.
Bruce, I'd be very happy to. I was born in Calgary. Most people think I'm a native Lethbridge boy, but I came here at about the age of 3 when Mr. A.W. Shackelford, who is certainly also well known here, went to Calgary and hired my parents to come down here and play in the theaters during the silent picture days. They were playing in the theaters in Calgary, and he brought them down here. And so really Lethbridge became my roots here, and I think that probably my mother and father were Mr. and Mrs. Music here for so many, many years in Lethbridge.
Of course, I remember them. I remember your mother used to help out with the schools, and so when I was going to school, she would come around once a week. And
she'd play for the choruses.
That's
and
right.
a whole bit.
And your father, of course, ran the music store that eventually became Leicester's.
That's right. You know, there's an interesting thing though about they were doing well in the theaters. These are the what we called the pit musicians. You know, and they'd play for the silent pictures. And my father had his complete library of music under the stage in the old, I should talk about the old theater, the old Colonial, which eventually became the Palace, and then it became the Capitol. And that was a theater that was torn down to make room for the Woodward Center. But he had all his music under in a room under the stage of the old Colonial Theater. And when a film came in, he would get a cue sheet with him, and he would have to pick out the music that was suitable for Indians going over the hill or love scenes or so on. And then, of course, that film would probably only play for a couple of days, and then he'd have to reissue the music to his orchestra. And he had about a 16-piece orchestra in those days.
So you really had to have a lot of talent
to
be able to do this.
So that was his job. But then came the Depression, and with the Depression, the talking pictures. Well, the advent of talkies threw millions of musicians out across North America, including my mother and father.
So when they came here, they were expecting to make their full living
absolutely.
In the theaters?
In the theater business, but that didn't happen.
Where I remember the Capitol, of course. Did they have this at the Roxy? And
no.
The pit was just in the
Well, at the Roxy they had probably a pianist, you know, but in the Capitol that was first class, and they had the full orchestra.
Who were some of the people that would have been in the orchestra besides your mother?
Well, in those days I can remember a man by the name of Harold McElvena, who played clarinet. Another man by the name of Raymond Van Heck, who played cornet. He worked in the post office. All these people had full-time jobs. Playing in the theaters was only a nighttime thing, you see. And they had a man by the name of Vince Parks, who had a jewelry store here. He played cello. I was pretty young then, so I'm just straining to get all the names. But as I say, when this happened, my father had only one thing to do, and that is to teach violin.
So where did he teach, out of his home? Or?
No, he, as a matter of fact, Mr. Shackelford gave him a studio in the old Majestic Theater, which became the Purity Dairy, which became nothing now. There's a mall over there now. And he used that as a studio for a while, and then he decided that if he was going to have students on the violin, he might as well put in a stock of violin strings and violins and bows, and that's where the Brown's musical supplies started.
Was there a lot of violin players in those days?
Oh yes, oh yes. As a matter of fact, Cliff Palmer, who is still living here and for many, many years was concertmaster of the Lethbridge Symphony, was one of my father's students. We had, there's another man playing in the symphony still, Hugh Laycock, who was a student of my father's, and Alec Pomerchuk, who just passed away. My father had many students here, and he was very proud of that fact. You know, he used to go down around the whole southern Alberta area, teaching violin at Coaldale on Mondays and Warner, Milk River Tuesday, Thursday, and then they come back into Lethbridge on Friday, Saturday. And I think he charged something like 50 cents for a half an hour.
He'd drive out to these places?
He would drive, yes.
And where would he stay? In the small hotel?
Well, he would just be out for the day.
Oh, I see.
He would use a room out there and teach.
Were there other kids in the family besides you?
My brother Jim, and he lives in Calgary yet. And Jim became a very proficient violinist in his own right, but I don't think he kept it up. You know, he got into business and so forth.
Now, you sang, maybe you still do sing, do you? Are you still singing?
Yes, I still sing.
Did you play musical instruments as well?
Yes, well, I started singing as a boy soprano, won my first festival class when I was 10.
Is this the Kiwanis Festival you're talking about?
Well, it wasn't then. It was run by the Lethbridge Registered Musical Teachers. Eventually it got too big and Kiwanis took it over. So I went on from there singing, and when my voice changed, I took 4 years off singing and studied the violoncello. And I still have my cello at home, although I never play it anymore.
You never played in the Lethbridge Symphony at all?
No, I never did. But I played with my mother and father. We had the Brown Trio, and we used to play at banquets and so on.
And what years are we talking about now?
Well, we're going back to, let me see, the late 1920s.
Before I forget, I should ask you about the old Marquis Hotel. This is where CJOC started, wasn't it? And you've had a very long, illustrious career in the media.
Well, yes. Jock Palmer founded the radio station, and he had various locations. The one I remember was on 5th Avenue A in his house. And then he relocated to the old Hull block, which, if it were here, would be on the site of the IGA store now, which formerly was Safeway. And then Mr. Harold Carson, partner in Carson, Taylor Pearson and Carson, bought the radio station from Jock Palmer.
So Jock was operating it all by himself, was he?
All by himself. It was a very small operation, you know. And I think Mr. Carson, with the vision that he displayed over the years, thought, you know, this could be quite a commercial concern, broadcasting. And so he bought the station from Jock Palmer for a very, very minimal price. And that's where our call letters come from, JOC, from Jock Palmer. And then the Marquis Hotel was built in, what, 1926 or 8?
Yeah, somewhere in that era.
Yeah. And we moved in there with a very modest operation, and finally we built our main studio and control rooms on what was later referred to as the penthouse of the Marquis. It sounded exotic, you know, it was just a big, and that's where we operated from since 1928.
Did you know Jock Palmer at all?
No, I didn't know him personally.
You probably know something about him, though.
Oh yes, he was a flyer.
Yeah. He must have been quite an innovative entrepreneur type.
Yes, he really was. And I don't know, people say that Mr. Carson bought the radio station from him for such a low price because Jock had owed the automotive company so much money for radios or batteries or tubes or whatever, you know. But it was kind of an interesting thing. But
you went into you joined the forces then in about 39, 40, somewhere in there?
No, well, I joined radio station CJOC in 1939 as an announcer. And this is kind of, I'll get to the forces in a moment, kind of an interesting story where I had been working for my father in his music store. I was still in school, Lethbridge Collegiate, And I would go down every afternoon after 4 o'clock and work till 6, and then on Saturday I'd work all day long. And on Saturday night at 6 o'clock, when the shop was closed, he would give me $1. That was my pay for the week. Mind you, I was living at home, but and then one day Mr. Shackelford phoned me and said, "How would you like to be an usher in the theater?" I said, "Oh no, I've already got a job with my father, you know." Well, he said, "No, this would only be in the evenings." Oh, I said, "Well, I might be able to do that." So I became an usher at $5 a week. Now I'm making $6 a week. I wouldn't call the queen my aunt now, you see. And then I had to go up to CJOC one day to sing a jingle, one of the very original ones here, I suppose, for Crystal Dairy. And the manager at that time came in and said, "Have you ever thought of being a radio announcer?" I said, "No, I never have." Well, he said, "We're looking for someone, and would you like to audition?" I did, and he offered me a job at $50 a month. Well, I didn't know what to do, so I spoke to my father, who was a canny little Scot, and I told him the situation. He said, "Oh," he says, "I think you better take it. I'll never be able to afford to pay you $50 a month." So that's how I started there. So in 1942, I joined the forces, went to Australia in the Signal Corps. We were one of the very few Canadians down there at the time. And I got into entertaining down there too. We formed a male quartet, and we had a choral society and a band of our own. As a matter of fact, we called ourselves, the male quartet, we called ourselves the Maple Leaf Quartet until a radio station in Darwin, where we were stationed, was called 5DR. And we went on 1 week, and the high and mighty of the armed forces said, "You can't call yourself the Maple Leaf Quartet. We don't want anybody to know that the Canadians are down here." So we had to change the name to the Harmony 4 or something. It was interesting. Yeah.
You mentioned the Signal Corps. How would you like to tell the listeners what the Signal Corps was?
Well, I took my training in Kingston, which is the big signal training center in Canada, at Vimy Barracks. And one day they came to us and said, "We want some volunteers to go somewhere." We were prepared to go to Europe, you know, and we didn't know where, but a bunch of us volunteered, and we ended up in Australia. And what we were trained for was Japanese code, and we had a big radio room there, manned 24 hours a day, and we intercepted from all the islands around Australia, which were occupied by the Japanese forces. We would intercept about 1,000 messages a day in Japanese code, and then we would transmit that to our intelligence people down in Brisbane, who would break the code down and find out what it was all about. So it was an interesting job.
And did that tie in with your radio connections? Is that how come you
well,
the signals?
Yeah, I kind of thought that it might be interesting, you know, in the technical end of it and so on. I never got into the technical thing, but I knew that somewhere along the line I would be able to use my association with broadcasting.
Were you ever worried about that part of Australia being invaded?
Oh, well, of course, they had been invaded, you see, just prior to the time we got there. Japanese submarines actually got right into the harbor of Sydney, Australia. And when we arrived in Darwin, the Japanese had bombed practically the entire city. The only building that was left was the New Darwin Hotel, and obviously they knew what they were doing because they were going to use that as their headquarters. But fortunately, they never made the landing in Darwin.
So it was a little scary, I guess.
It was scary. Yeah.
All right, so you were there till the end of the war then, were you?
Yeah, I came back in 1946 and came back to CJOC as production manager. I think many people will remember Norman Botterill was manager here for so many years and is still living. He wrote me a letter in Australia saying that when I came back, when and if he put in, and I thought that was kind of a scary thing, when and if you come back, I would like to offer you the position of production manager. Well, when I returned in '46, Norman had been moved to St. John, New Brunswick, I think. But anyway, my job was there for me. The new manager had held it. And so I started to program CJOC, and then I went to Calgary and did the same thing with our station up there, CFAC.
So you were working up the ranks.
Yeah, and then I moved over to our television station in Calgary as sales manager, and then the same Mr. Botterill phoned me one day and said, how would you like to go back to Lethbridge as general manager of the radio and television? Because that was the time that Johnny McCall, who many people remember, was being moved to Calgary. So I immediately said, yes, I would love to come back to Lethbridge, and I came back in '72, and here I am.
I see. Now you've raised your own family now, haven't you?
Yes.
How many of those are musical? I know of one that is. How about the others?
Actually, I should say they're all musical, except they've never followed music because, like the four boys, they're all in business now and they're doing their own thing.
Tell us about that.
My two daughters, the older daughter, Adair, has now 5 children living in Victoria, but she received her Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Calgary, and she's still playing. She plays for the ballet out in Victoria and plays in the church and so on. My youngest daughter, Bonnie Jean, who lives here, lives in Nobleford, is married to Jerry Picarney, who is also a musician, teaches at the LCI, and she has been very active in Lethbridge Musical Theatre here, teaching the choral groups and so on for the last few years. She just had a baby about a week ago, and I don't know whether she's going to be involved in musical theater anymore, not for a while anyway. The 4 boys, they've got into different things. My oldest boy is managing director of the Canadian Pipeline Contractors Association and lives in Oakville, Ontario. My second son, George Jr., is an architect in Calgary. My third son, Terry, is a computer analyst or a computer, I don't know what he does on computers, but anyway, he lives in England. And my youngest son is also in pipeline business. And that's it.
Now most of these, the kids, would they have been through school by the time you came back to Lethbridge, or did they?
No, well, Bonnie, I guess, was the only one who hadn't been. When we came back, she went back to LCI. Yeah, they got their schooling in Calgary.
Well, you were mentioning earlier that just about you've been in the business that you're in for 50 years. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, okay, I started as an announcer in 1939, okay? Now, I've been with my company ever since. Granted, I took an early retirement as president and general manager a few years ago, but I'm still involved. I've been on the advisory board of Lethbridge Broadcasting, and I do a 3-hour show every Sunday morning called Musical Memories. And so if I can live and carry on with what I'm doing right now until next December, I will have been 50 years with Selkirk Broadcasting. And that's sort of a goal that I have. I hope to be able to do that.
Are there any others that have come close to that?
Well, I'm not sure. I've known so many broadcasters across Canada over the years, and I think there's probably, at that time I will be 72 years of age, but I'm sure there are a lot of people in the broadcast industry who are 72 and still performing their various businesses, probably behind the desk. I don't think there are too many at my age who would still be performing on the air, and I'd like to try and keep that going.
Now that Sunday morning program must be a real delight for you, is it?
It is. It is a delight for me. As a matter of fact, when I was moved back here in '72, Bob Lang, who was our production manager, asked me if I would go on the air on Sunday morning and do this type of show, because he said our ratings are not all that good, and maybe you could play some of the music that you played when you got into the business, and you know the market, you know the people. And I didn't want to do that. I've got a new job here as a manager, but anyway, he twisted my arm, and we started that in October of 1972. So I'm about 16 years on the show now. We gradually increased the length of the show. It was once an hour, and then we had the Mormons saying, well, we can't hear you because, and the Catholics say we can't. So we hope that over the span of 3 hours on Sunday morning, we're getting most of the people who go to church. But that's how that came about, and it's a very satisfying thing to me, Bruce, because music has been my whole life, music and broadcasting, and it's so rewarding to get all the letters and phone calls from all over southern Alberta from people who say, we enjoy your program and keep it up. And,
well, as I said earlier, you're an institution, and so...
Well, I don't know about that, but the thing is that also a few years ago I lost the use of my legs, and that program was therapy for me, because the handy bus would pick me up and take me down, and I knew that I had that obligation every week to do, and I think that was one of the things that helped me restore my health.
Now, I know when my father had a stroke, was sick in the early 60s, the therapy that got him through, I think, was he wrote his memoirs. Have you ever thought of doing any of that?
I've thought about it, but I haven't really started it yet.
That's the problem. Everybody thinks about it.
And I really think that it's something that a person in my position should do, because here I have 6 children now and 11 grandchildren, and they really don't know what I have done. Eh? And I should really sit down and write, either on paper or on a tape, to leave this with them so that they know what has gone on in the past.
That's right. So I was saying on an earlier show, you know, it's too bad more people don't do this.
Yeah.
Whether they hesitate for some reason, I'm not quite sure why.
Well, in my case, I think I'm getting so involved in so many things. I do a lot of public speaking. For instance, I was down at Milk River the other evening speaking to the Chamber of Commerce. I go across Canada speaking to various conventions and so forth, mainly on the topic of public relations, which I love. And then I do my singing bit, and I get involved in United Way. I was chairman of that for 2 years. I'm on the board of the Red Cross here. People can be busy if they want to be busy.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And I think the fact that they can be busy relates to their health. So many people just sit at home and say, what do I do? Well,
now, when you were mentioning that you were quite sick and you had trouble walking, I believe, for a while. How did you get over that?
Well, it was related to my diabetes. They diagnosed it in Calgary as diabetic neuropathy, which was affecting the muscles of my lower limbs. And the doctor up there immediately put me, I had not been on insulin, and he immediately put me on insulin, and he said that in another year I might walk again. So I came back here and went to a doctor whom he recommended, and eventually he took me off insulin completely, and I feel great.
That's great.
I think it's a lot up here too, you know, you have to make up your mind that you want to do these things. That's and you want to get better.
Yeah. Before we leave, I think, I bet you a lot of people would like to know, you mentioned Lang, for example. Could you give us a rundown on where some of the names that we heard over the years, what's happened to them? Well,
Bob Lang is presently our acting manager now of our station in Edmonton, CJCA. And we had other people, when I'm going back to my days now, Lou Ruskin, who was an announcer with me, is, I think, owner or part owner and manager of CHQT, the quality radio station in Edmonton. We had so many people go through these halls. Jim Elliott, of course, who was with us, he's back now here with general manager of Czech Radio. We had people who left us and who have since passed away. Henry Viney, who that name would be most familiar to people of southern Alberta, who was our sportscaster. And after the war, he came back to CFCN in Calgary and was there. They referred to him at one time as the Dean of Canadian Sportcasters. Not that he was a great play-by-play man, but he knew every rule of every game.
Is that right?
Oh, yes. I don't know how long we have, but I can recall when he was still broadcasting for us, there was some type of a baseball game in McLeod. It was called McLeod at that time. And he was umpire, and he made a decision that the McLeod people didn't particularly like. And he wouldn't give up on that. He had the rule book in his pocket, and he said, and I think for about 1 year there wasn't a McLeod merchant spent $1 on CJOC. They were so upset with his decision. So he was another great one. And And we had Bob Buss, who actually hired me into the business. He's passed away, but he went on to various radio stations across Canada.
Do people that get into the media usually stay there? I mean, is it sort of
I think so.
It's a family
I think so.
type?
And it's an exciting kind of a business. You know, it's a business where every day it presents a challenge. You know, it's not like selling ties in the department store. I mean, it's a business of ideas, and I think it's exciting.
One of the things that I found interesting when the CBC radio went on strike a month or so ago, they brought in the management to fill these positions, and they all had these beautiful booming voices.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. Well,
so
I suppose that a voice is quite essential, really. Although I've always said that if I had to choose between a man with a beautiful voice and one with not quite so fine a voice, but has the ability to speak properly and use good diction, I would take this one over the Lorne Green type of individual, you know.
Well, we haven't got much time, but one thing I'd like to ask you is how things have changed in the business over the years.
Well, they've changed greatly. When I started, there were 4 of us on the staff, and we used to have to sell. We went out and called on clients. We'd come back and write the commercial copy, and then we would announce it. And in those days, all the commercials were live. We had no such thing as taping. We did have the old 16-inch aluminum discs and so on, but that was a kind of a slow process, because if you made a mistake, that was ruined. You don't erase it and start again. So that has changed, and of course the music has changed. Various formats across the country, western and heavy metal and rock and a whole bit.
Oh, at one time was the music have to be live or not?
Well, we did a lot of live broadcasting, yes, because we had a rather large studio above the Marquis. We had a Hammond organ there and a grand piano, and we did a lot of live broadcasting, you know. But that now in a radio station has gone completely due to the advent of television, of course. So now it's all disc.
Is there anything about the world that you're disappointed in? Things that you're not happy with?
Well, of course, being an old programmer, I'm disappointed in some of the formats, the music formats, really. And also, in the olden days, I sound like King Arthur or something, but in those days, we were given the privilege of choosing our discs and choosing our programs that we wanted to broadcast. And we had a very competitive spirit among announcers, you know, like Galt Elton. I should have mentioned Galt Elton, who was an announcer with me. His father became mayor of the city of Lethbridge, and Galt eventually went on to manage our station in Vancouver, CKWX. He's retired now. But we used to do so many things, and he would pick out programs and do them, and I would pick out something else and do them, and one tried to vie against each other as to who was doing the better job. Now, of course, it's quite different. The announcers have their discs all chosen for them, and they just walk in and...
Except your Sunday morning program.
Except my Sunday morning program, and I do that. And I have only 3 hours, but I take just about every day during the week to pick that out properly and make sure that I have it the way I want it.
I'm sure it shows, because you seem to have the
yeah,
people
we have
out
lots
there.
of listeners. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, George, for coming on the show. Years ago, I was on your show.
Yes.
Now I finally got back at you. and I should mention that these programs have been preserved by Duncan Rand at the Public Library, and we hope that, in fact, I think I talked to you about this when I was on your show. I asked you if you were saving these programs.
Yes,
and you
right.
weren't. Well, we're doing ours, and we're saving ours.
That's excellent.
So I hope
wonderful.
It works out well.
And thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks a lot.
Okay.
And we'll see everybody next week, we hope, in Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Good night. Well, thanks a lot.
Okay.